In this video, we will learn how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. And I love this method because it's like a puzzle to me and it's fun to try to figure out and solve. So for this first example, what we do to start is we multiply the first coefficient times the last constant, and we're going to multiply those numbers together. Then off to the side, I write this. I write that I want to find two numbers that multiply to what those two numbers multiplied to. Positive 3 times positive 6 gives me 18. Then I want those same two numbers to add to the middle coefficient. So I want those same two numbers to add to negative 11. And this is where the puzzle part comes in. We have to try to figure out two numbers that multiply to give me positive 11, but then when we add them, gives us negative 11. And this is where it might take a little time to figure out those two numbers. Well, if they have to multiply to a positive number and add to a negative number, I know those two numbers both have to be negative. It turns out those numbers are negative 9 and negative 2. Those numbers are going to come in useful right now. So what we do next is those two numbers I circled, I'm just going to separate them. So I'm going to bring the 3x squared over here on the left, and then I'm going to bring the plus 6 over here on the right. I can't forget to bring down that equals 0. After all, I am solving an equation. Then this is where the two numbers that I found over here are going to be used. I'm then going to write negative 9x and negative 2x. They need to match the variable that's in the middle term. So minus 9x and minus 2x. Now, if you look at this, we actually have not changed the problem at all. That's because if you combine negative 9x and negative 2x, you will get negative 11x. And that's important to notice that you haven't changed the original problem. From here, we're going to do something called factor by grouping, or we're going to split it down the middle. So right after the second term of negative 9x, I'm going to split it right down the middle. Then I'm going to look at the first half. 3x squared minus 9x, and now I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of those two terms. That is 3x. So to help me, I'm going to divide both of them by 3x to help me figure out what I have left over. So I factor out that greatest common factor of 3x, and then 3x squared divided by 3x gives me x, and negative 9x divided by 3x gives me a minus 3. Let's do the same thing on the second half. I look at negative 2x and positive 6. I want to factor out the greatest common factor. Now here's a hint. If the beginning number is negative, factor out a negative GCF. So I'm going to factor out a minus 2. Once I do that, negative 2x divided by negative 2 is simply x, and positive 6 divided by negative 2 is a negative 3. And then don't forget to bring down that equals 0. And this is when I know if I've done the problem correctly. I know I've done it correctly if these factors right here are completely identical. That's what I want to see. So now my final factored form is x minus 3, and then putting together the numbers in front, 3x minus 2, and then set this equal to 0. From now, we're going to use something called the zero product property, and that tells us if I'm multiplying two things together and they equal 0, well, that means one of those two things, one of those two factors have to equal 0. So from here, I'm going to set up two equations. One equation is x minus 3 equals 0, and the other equation is the 3x minus 2 equals 0. Solving both of these gives me solutions of x equals 3 and x equals positive 2/3. And that is the answer to this original quadratic equation. And we just solved that by factoring. By the way, if you're finding this video useful, make sure to click subscribe so you're notified when new videos come out to help you in your various math classes. Let's take a look at a second example. In this example, it looks a little different from the first example because it doesn't say equals 0. In fact, that's what we need to make sure that we do first. We need this side to say 0. So we need to subtract this 14 over to the other side. That doesn't have a like term with anything on the left side, so we need to keep it as x squared minus 5x minus 14. Now I'm going to do exactly what I did on the last problem. I'm going to write a coefficient of 1 in front of that, and then I'm going to circle the first coefficient and the last constant, and multiply those two numbers together. I get negative 14. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 14, and those same two numbers need to add to the middle coefficient, which is negative 5. Take a moment to think about those numbers, and I think they are negative 7 and positive 2. Those two numbers would multiply to negative 14 and add to negative 5. Remember, those are going to be your two middle terms. So the two things I circled, we're going to separate those. So I'm going to separate the 1x squared and the minus 14. Don't forget to bring down that equals 0. And the two numbers that I found over here on the left, those are going to be my two middle terms. And make sure they match up with the variable in the center. Once again, I have not changed this problem because if I combine negative 7x and 2x, I do get negative 5x. It's time to split it down the middle and do our factor by grouping. The number that I can factor out of the first half, it looks like just an x. I divide both sides, or both terms, I should say, by x because that helps me see what I would have left over once I simplify that. That would give me x minus 7. Now let's look at the second half. I think our greatest common factor is a positive 2. So let's factor out the positive 2, and I'm left with x minus 7. Bring down the equal 0. Our final factored form, oh, by the way, did I do it correctly? I know I did because these match up right here. So my final factored form is x minus 7 times x plus 2 equals 0. Again, let's use our zero product property that says if I multiply two factors together and get 0, well then either the first factor has to equal 0 or the second factor has to equal 0. And that gives me my final answers of 7 and negative 2. Now wait a second, I'm going to show you something that's a little bit interesting. Notice that my numbers over here that I found were negative 7 and 2, and in fact, those matched up with the factors that I found later on. And that is because my leading coefficient was 1. So yes, as long as your leading coefficient is 1, you can use a shortcut and go directly from your numbers over here straight to your factors. Whereas we could not do that on the last problem. Notice negative 9 and negative 2 were not my factors here, and that's because the leading coefficient was not 1. Let's look at one more example. In this one, there's only two terms, so actually I do not use the method of circling the first number and the last number. This is simply a greatest common factor solving problem. I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of 9x, and I do this just to help me see what the simplified form would be, and that would be x plus 3. And because I'm done factoring, I go straight to the zero product property, where I set each factor equal to 0, and solve, and that would give me solutions of 0 and negative 3. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to be notified when new videos come out that will help you in your math classes. Thanks for watching.